Hey friends, it's Dave here. Thanks for tuning in as always. Today I wanted to bring another kind of year-end video to you guys. This one's inspired by a recent article written by Eric Berger. He gave us power rankings of space companies and ranked how well he thought they did this calendar year. So I thought I'd do something similar and I would bring you power rankings of the space SPAC stocks. So this only includes companies that went public via SPAC, the new space, if you will. You're not going to see names like Northrop Grumman, Lockheed Martin, Boeing, and that kind of thing in here, although they are still very much space companies. Right now, this is just a ranking from all these new space SPACs. I think it's a very interesting time. It's very rare that you get so many companies from a given industry going public via SPAC at the same time. And each time these companies went public, they issued an investor presentation and provided some guidance. So obviously, I think it's a little unfair for me to just rank who I think did the best and who I think did the worst. I'm trying to bring a bit of impartiality to it, if that's a word. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to compare these companies against themselves, against what they said they would do a couple years ago when they went public via SPAC. Most of them seem to have gone public around 2021. It really seems like that was the boom for all these SPACs. So we're going to take a look at their investor presentations, take a look at how much revenue they said they would be making in 2022, compare it with how much revenue they're actually receiving in 2022 and rank them accordingly, as well as provide a little bit of commentary on each company. And it was pretty eye-opening in a lot of ways. Some of these companies I don't know as much about, but seeing as how they've ranked on the list, it's going to kind of adjust which companies I'm most interested in going forward, which ones I want to take a deeper look at, and which ones I definitely want no part of. So if that sounds interesting to you, let's dive into the power rankings. So starting this off in last place, we actually have Virgin Galactic. I didn't expect this. If you would just ask me my opinion, what company had the worst year, I would have told you probably Astra, but by the numbers compared to what they projected, it looks like Virgin Galactic had a pretty disastrous 2022, at least compared to the crazy numbers they were projecting in their investor presentation back when they went de-SPAC. So on one of their slides, we have this handy dandy chart showing their revenue, and obviously the growth is absolutely insane. But if we're looking at 2022 estimate, we are seeing $398 million. That's crazy to me. I don't see how they were ever going to hit those kind of numbers with their spacecraft. It's only a tourist business. I think they're charging about $250,000 a pop, but don't quote me on that. I may be wrong. And you can't actually fit that many tourists in each spacecraft. They would have had to have been launching so many of these things to get this kind of revenue. I don't know where this projection came from, really. But anyway, that's what they projected, almost 400 million. And what we saw was in Q1, about 320,000, Q2, 350,000, Q3, 760,000, and Q4 about 700,000. Now Q4 is projected. We're going off of their guidance that they gave us at the end of Q3. Obviously, this might vary a little bit, and that holds true for all of these companies, but it should be pretty close, and I really didn't want to wait for all the Q4 numbers to come out for this year-end video, so we're just going to go off the guidance. I think it's really enough to give us a good sense of the trajectory of each company and how they're doing. Virgin had a horrible year. They did successfully launch Richard Branson into orbit and have what seemed like a successful test flight. However, apparently the aircraft came in too low. It didn't follow their designated flight path, and that caused all kinds of problems with safety reviews, things of that nature, and they're still not back up and running. I'm really not sure what the holdup is at this point, but they really need to get some passengers flying in order to start making some revenue, because they are burning massive amounts of capital. So in last place, we have Virgin Galactic. Here's hoping they have a better 2023. Second last place, or number 7. This one is Astra. It's one we've talked a lot about if you've followed the channel. I am not a fan of the company. Don't wish ill to any of their investors, though. You guys have my sympathies. I can understand why you may have bought into the premise, the ideas. They made a good pitch, really, is what it comes down to. But clearly the execution has not been there as of yet, at least. So we had a whole chart for them for their projections, but basically if you narrow down to it, we're seeing total revenue 2022 estimate of $67 million. This is when they went de-SPAC their investor presentation. And remember, guys, these presentations were not that long ago. It's not like they made these estimates up 10 years ago. I mean, clearly they're going to be way off if they're like 10-year-old estimates. These are relatively recent, and to miss these numbers by this wide of a margin is really pretty wild. Obviously, they had a lot of problems with their Rocket 3.0 spacecraft, or 3.3, several failures. They did have a couple successful flights, so you do see some revenue coming in, but not nearly enough to meet what they expected. And now in 2022, they actually completely axed their Rocket 3.0, gave up on it. I'd really love more details on why they decided they had to give up on this rocket and they couldn't fix the issues and get flying again. I don't think we ever got a full explanation of what happened in that last failure. I know it seemed like something to do with engine efficiency or running out of fuel, not being able to get to the proper orbit, but I'd love some more details on that. We just didn't get it. Anyway, by the numbers at least, they projected 67 million, which is at least quite a bit lower than the lofty numbers Virgin Galactic was projecting. But what did we get? We got 3.9 million in Q1, 2.7 in Q2, 2.8 in Q3, and a projected 2.2 in Q4. Obviously, this could vary a little bit in Q4. As I said, that totals 11.6 million, leaving them off by almost $50 million on their estimates, and on a percentage basis, just not even close, not even in the ballpark. So that brings them into second last place in my power rankings for space SPACs in 2022. Third last place, aka sixth place, is Virgin Orbit. They had a rough year as well, obviously not as bad as Astra or Virgin Galactic, their kind of sister company. I will say that behind the scenes, they do seem to be working pretty hard. They're making some progress on their spaceport Cornwall and being able to launch from various locations around the world, working on new aircraft to launch from, and they did have a couple successful launches this year, but still not enough to meet their revenue guidance from when they went public. So they projected, obviously in this slide, 2022, they projected $70 million in revenue. What did we have? Well, we had 2.1 million in Q1. We actually had 0 in Q2, so no revenue whatsoever. Never looks good. Q3 was pretty impressive, though. They brought in 30.9 million. And now Q4, the guidance says up to 7, which I don't really like because it's not really a range. That's anywhere from 0 to 7. So I just picked the middle ground there and, gave them like 3.5, I believe. And we came in at about $37 million total. Obviously, that is well short of their 7 million expected. So they were negative 47%. So they achieved about 53% of their expected revenue. Starting to make a dent in these expected revenues, but still not looking good for these space SPACs so far. At least these guys are in the double digits, though. Next up is Spire, and I have to admit that I don't know these guys as well as some of the others, so let me know down in the comments if you are very familiar with the company and what they do. Obviously, they're in satellites, they're not in launch, but they have been bringing in some decent numbers. Obviously, still not meeting what they projected when they went public. In the presentation, when they went public, they projected $145 million in revenue, and what we got was, well, Q1, $18.1 million, Q2, $19.4 million, Q3, $20.4 million, and Q4 is a projected $23.1 million. That brings their actual revenue up to $81 million, so they are negative 44% on their projection. However, I will say it's nice to see these numbers relatively even and gradually rising, right? We've got 18, 19, 20, a projected 23. So clearly going in the right direction, and every quarter they're getting revenue, unlike some of these previous companies where the numbers are kind of just all over the place depending on what's going on that quarter. The revenue for Spire seems to be a lot more consistent. This company might have a little more promise than some of these others, at least by these numbers. Number 4 is Redwire. So I did do a video on them a while back. If you didn't check it out, I recommend going back and watching it. It'll give you a little bit of an idea of what the company does. They are a space infrastructure company. They have a lot of hardware on the International Space Station, on various satellites, doing different experiments and science and research. So their game is trying to take advantage of lowering launch costs, not getting into the launch business themselves, but they have some cool things like a new greenhouse on the ISS. They've got all sorts of various deals. They've made a lot of acquisitions over the past year or so, but they still have not hit the numbers they were guiding for back when they went public. So in the chart, we can see that 2022 estimate revenue was $237 million, which is actually quite a lot. It's more than a lot of these other names. Q1 revenues of $32.9 million, Q2 revenues of $36.7 million, Q3 of $37.2 million, and a projected Q4 revenue of $40.7 million, meaning that they're negative 38% on their projection. Their actual numbers are coming in around 146.8 million, give or take, depending on Q4. So down 38% from their projection. We're starting to get a bit in the ballpark here, though. It's a bit better. Also like to see these numbers going up fairly steadily, and the quarters are not that lumpy. We don't have sudden drops if something happens in a single quarter. So kind of like to see this in terms of revenue, but we just need more from them. If you're a Redwire investor, let me know down below what you're expecting for 2023. Next up, this was a very close one. Second and third place were actually neck and neck, and it really comes down to how their Q4 will go. Judging by the projected numbers, the Q4 for this next company puts it just slightly below second place, but that could easily change when we get those final numbers. So coming in at number 3 is Planet Labs. This is a stock that a bunch of people in the Discord follow quite closely. We have several Planet Labs investors in there. I'm not currently an investor myself, but they have done quite well in 2022. So congratulations to Planet Labs as well as their shareholders. They do a lot of Earth imaging in the optical spectrum, I believe. So like satellites that are looking at Earth and providing imaging services for customers. In Q1, they made $40.1 million. In Q2, $48.5 million. In Q3, $49.7 million. And in Q4, we have a projected number of $51.7 million. Now, back in their investor presentation, when they went public, they did forecast for a $191 million revenue number. I know this says 2023. Their financial years are quite odd, so everything seems to be a year ahead on their site. But the actual number now comes in at 190, so pretty much right on what they forecasted. That's really amazing to see. And not only that, we are seeing pretty solid revenue growth quarter over quarter. No declines. Like to see that as well. Obviously, Q4 still a little bit of a question mark. They could come in even above that 191 number or a little bit below. This is kind of the midpoint of what's projected, though. So that means they're only at a negative 0.6% compared to what they forecasted. Extremely well done by the Planet Labs team. Now, number 2 is Terran Orbital. It's another one that I did make a video on quite a while back now. A lot of clients in the defense and government space, they are a satellite company as well. Now, they projected back when they went public that in 2022, they would make about $94 million in revenue. So how did they actually do? Well, in Q1, we had 13.1 million, so off to a bit of a slow start, but it picked up quite a bit in Q2. They had a $21.4 million revenue number, so that is a massive growth quarter over quarter. Q3 was $27.8 million. Again, quite significant revenue growth quarter over quarter. The trend is looking good here. And then Q4, the analyst estimate, because I couldn't find any official company guidance on Q4. By the way, Terran Orbital, you need to work on your website a little bit. But anyway, Q4 analyst estimate numbers are 31.26 million, bringing the actual revenue numbers for the full year to 93.56, or just shy of the 94 million number, coming in 0.5% below, just slightly edging out Planet Labs. But depending on how these Q4 numbers shake out, Planet Labs could easily slide into second place, so we'll have to keep an eye on these two. And number 1, probably not a lot of surprises here if you follow the channel, but it is Rocket Lab. Now, I tried to do this in an unbiased way, going by the numbers they gave themselves in their investor presentation. We can see the slide here on the right. Projected revenue numbers of 176 million. Now, they weren't quite right on with these because you can see in red is the launch number, and in gray is the space systems number. And these were almost flipped. We had a lot more revenue from space systems than we did from launch. So they did miss in terms of how much revenue they would get from launch, but they made up for it, more than made up for it, by the numbers they received in the space system side. Now, you could come back and say, well, it's not really fair because they're just buying companies and getting the revenue through these purchases. That's true to a degree, but they're making good acquisitions. They've always said that was part of the plan. That's why they raised so much additional capital, and they do want to be a vertically integrated space company. So as far as I'm concerned, it's all good, but I would like to see launch numbers catch up to their projections at some point in the future. If by some miracle someone watching this video is not familiar with Rocket Lab, they are a full end-to-end space company. They have a small launch rocket called Electron where they can launch satellites into space. They've sent a mission for NASA to the moon. They did 9 launches this year, a little short of what we were hoping, but they are still by far the leader in the small launch space. They're working on a medium launch vehicle as well called Neutron, looking to come online 2024 or 2025. As well, they do manufacturing satellites. They have all sorts of components, as well as software, and really, as I said, just a full end-to-end space company. So going back to the numbers, in Q1, they did 40.7 million. In Q2, they did 55.5 million. In Q3, we saw 63.1 million. And Q4, obviously this is guidance as well, we're now looking at around 46 to 47 million dollars. So the trend is pretty good here for Rocket Lab, with the obvious big exception of Q4. That's a sharp downward move after we've had a nice upward trend. A lot of this has to do with that last launch from Wallops getting delayed and pushed back into next year. Extremely disappointing to see. That would have been probably $8 million of revenue, so they probably wouldn't have been at a record, but it still would have been a lot better to get that revenue for the launch. We had all sorts of delays caused by NASA, caused by red tape, caused by the weather. None of it was the company's fault themselves, but we're not here to make excuses for anyone, so these are the numbers they have. And at the end of the day, that comes in at $205.8 million, which is actually a beat of their $176 million projection by almost $30 million. So this is the only company that's actually beat those projections across the board. The rest were lower. Some were pretty much right on and did quite well, being Terran Orbital and Planet Labs. Others were very far below their projections, like Astra or Virgin Galactic. But Rocket Lab beats by 16%. So overall, I would say extremely well done. That is my first place company. And I really just hope to see launch kind of catch up to Space Systems in the coming years, because as far as I'm concerned, Space Systems is really operating on all cylinders. So those were the rankings. Obviously, revenue doesn't even come close to covering the whole story. The margins are a big deal in this business, as well as a lot of other factors, but I wanted to be impartial about it. Just take one statistic, compare them against their projections, and see how they did. Which of these companies do you own in your portfolio? How do you feel about how they did? If you had to make your own list, what would be number one? What would be in last place? I'd love to hear your answers in the comments down below. If you haven't subscribed yet and you enjoyed this video, please do hit like and subscribe down below. It'll really help this channel. I hope you have a great day, a great new year, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye for now.